When did you realize you loved your girlfriend even more? I realized I loved her more in a moment that wasn't supposed to be romantic at all. We were in a supermarket. Just a normal evening, both tired after work. I was standing in front of the sauce shelf, completely lost, while she went off to grab something else. I spent about 5 minutes comparing two identical jars and still couldn't tell the difference. Then I heard her voice from the other side of the store. She was loudly and very seriously explaining to an elderly woman the difference between lactose-free yogurt and regular one, and why sugar-free isn't always healthy. I just stood there watching her wave her hands, give examples, laugh, while the woman nodded like she was listening to an expert. At some point, they both looked at me. She smiled and shouted, "See? I told you he doesn't understand either." People around us laughed. I turned red, and then realized I didn't feel embarrassed at all. That's when it hit me. I loved her more not because of big words or rare perfect moments, but because around her I could be a little stupid, and it was okay. I realized I loved my girlfriend even more on a day when absolutely everything went wrong. We were supposed to go on a short trip. Nothing fancy, just a weekend away. I was sure everything was under control. Tickets, backpack, chargers, headphones, documents. I like knowing things are planned. She doesn't. She packed at the last minute, ran around the apartment, remembered things, forgot them again, told me a story about her friend, and asked if I'd seen her gray sweater. I was nervous. I wanted silence and order. I was slightly irritated, but kept quiet. When we finally left, it turned out she'd forgotten her passport. I just closed my eyes. We went back. Missed our transport. The next one was in 2 hours. The whole day's plan collapsed. I was already preparing myself to be in a bad mood when I noticed she wasn't upset at all. She sat on a bench, eating some pastry, laughing, and said it was probably for the best. No need to rush now. I couldn't understand how this didn't bother her. Later, we realized she'd also mixed up the address of the place she booked. Not the city, the district. We got off in the wrong area, walked for a long time carrying our bags, and I kept running worst-case scenarios in my head. She walked next to me, talking the whole time. About getting lost at train stations as a kid. About chaotic family trips. About how if things go wrong, at least you'll remember them. When we finally arrived, the place was much simpler than the photos. Small room, creaky bed, strange smell. I stood there, feeling disappointed. She took off her jacket, sat on the bed, and said, "At least the window is nice." And it was. You could see the city, not perfect or touristy, just alive. Cars, lights, people. We ordered food. She spilled sauce, dropped her phone, started laughing so hard I couldn't help but laugh too. And suddenly, a very simple thought hit me. I didn't care that the trip went wrong. I didn't need perfection. I needed her next to me. That's when I realized I loved her more. Not when everything was going right, but when everything fell apart, and I still felt calm with her. There are moments when you suddenly realize your feelings didn't fade. They grew deeper. That's what happened to me one awkward night. That evening wasn't supposed to mean anything. I definitely didn't expect it to be the moment I realized I loved my girlfriend even more. We went to a bar quiz with her group of friends. I knew most of them only a little and tried hard to look normal. Not too loud, not too confident, not too much me. At first, everything was fine. I relaxed, got into it, felt comfortable. And, as always, that's when I stopped filtering myself. There was a movie question I was completely sure about. I didn't just answer. I insisted. Interrupted others, explained why they were wrong, pushed my point. The answer was wrong. So wrong it became awkward for everyone. The table went quiet. I felt my stomach drop. I wanted to disappear, to fade into the background, to not be that guy. And that's when she did something I'll never forget. She didn't pull away, didn't roll her eyes, didn't look embarrassed. She laughed first. Not mockingly, genuinely. Said I was just overly confident and that moments like that are what make things fun. She nudged me, ordered me a drink, and moved the conversation forward like nothing bad had happened. Sitting there, I realized something important. I didn't feel exposed. I didn't feel judged. I felt safe. Later, walking home, I apologized and admitted I'd messed up. She said something simple. It didn't matter how I looked to others. What mattered was who I was with her. That's when it hit me. I didn't fall in love deeper during a romantic moment, but during embarrassment, when she could have stepped away and chose to stay. There are things that reveal who you really are. Not dates, not nice words, everyday life. I realized I loved my girlfriend even more the day she saw my real chaos and didn't run. It was the first time she stayed over. Not spontaneous, planned. I prepared, cleaned the apartment, hid random mess, wiped dust in places I usually ignore. I wanted to look like someone who had their life together. It worked, temporarily. That night, I woke up to a strange feeling. Realized it was me. And realized it too late. Long story short, I got sick. Not dramatic, but enough to know this was about to be humiliating. I quietly got out of bed, trying not to wake her, and rushed to the bathroom. The plan was simple. Survive it quickly, clean up, go back. No one needs to know. The plan failed. I realized there was no toilet paper. None. Not, maybe somewhere. Absolutely none. I sat there staring into space, feeling my confidence dissolve. Then I heard her wake up. She knocked and asked in a sleepy voice if everything was okay. I had a choice. Lie or confess. I chose the truth. The awkward, adult, deeply embarrassing truth. She went quiet for a second, then told me to wait. A minute later, she came back with napkins, a towel, and, for some reason, my sock. Completely serious. I walked out of the bathroom red-faced, defeated, wanting to laugh and disappear at the same time. She looked at me and said it felt like we'd just completed an accelerated course in living together. I started apologizing, explaining that I'm usually not like this. She listened, nodded, then said she actually found it funny. We went back to bed. I was sure the image I'd built was completely ruined. But in the morning, she was in a great mood, made coffee, and casually said she felt strangely calmer around me now. That's when it clicked. If someone sees you at your worst, in the dumbest, most uncomfortable, most human moment, and doesn't pull away, but laughs and helps, you start loving them not for your perfect version, but because next to them, you're allowed to be real. It wasn't a special day, no anniversary, no big conversation, just a normal evening you wouldn't even remember later. We were at my place. She was watching something on her laptop. I was lying next to her scrolling through my phone. At some point, I fell asleep. Not on purpose, it just happened. I woke up because it got quiet. I usually wake up suddenly, a little startled, but this time it felt calm. I realized I was covered with a blanket. The old blanket I keep near the couch and never use because it's scratchy. I didn't even notice when she grabbed it. I stayed still for a while. I could hear her quietly moving around the kitchen, filling the kettle, trying not to make noise. When she came back, she didn't realize I was awake. She sat down, looked at me for a few seconds, gently pulled the blanket up on my shoulder, and went back to what she was doing. She didn't wake me up, didn't ask if I needed anything, didn't turn it into some visible act of care. And that's what hit me. I realized I loved her more not because of grand gestures, but because she thought about me even when I wasn't asking and when I wasn't watching. Later, when I finally opened my eyes and told her I'd been awake for a while, she got embarrassed and said she didn't want to disturb me. We didn't talk about it again. But sometimes love grows deeper not because of what someone does, but because of who they are when they think you can't see it. We had been dating for about 6 months back then. Not the honeymoon stage anymore, but not routine either. That phase where you're together, yet life is still pulling you in different directions. I was working like crazy, 70 to 80 hours a week, sometimes without days off. I'd come home late, eat whatever was nearby, and fall asleep knowing the next day would look exactly the same. I wasn't tired in a romantic way. I was drained. The kind of tired where talking feels heavy and emotions go quiet. That evening, I came home especially late. It was already past midnight. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my jacket on a chair, and sat on the edge of the bed just staring at the floor. My phone rang almost immediately. It was her. We talked for a few minutes. Nothing important. I remember telling her I needed to take a shower and go straight to sleep. Not because I didn't want to talk, but because I had nothing left in me. She said, "Okay," and wished me good night. A normal call. Nothing special. I stood in the shower longer than usual. Hot water, silence, no thoughts, just exhaustion. When I got out, wrapped a towel around myself, and was about to collapse into bed, the doorbell rang. At first, I thought I imagined it. I checked the clock. Then it rang again. I opened the building door through the intercom, still not fully understanding what was happening. A couple of minutes later, she was standing there. Not dressed up, not ready for a date. Just a regular jacket, a bag in her hands, hair slightly messy from the trip. You could tell she had simply gotten up and come. She said quietly that she decided to stop by, that she could hear in my voice how exhausted I was, that the thought of me going to work the next day with nothing to eat didn't sit right with her. She walked into the kitchen like it was the most natural thing in the world and started taking food out of the bag. Homemade meals. Carefully packed. Labeled. For the next day, and the day after. I stood in the doorway watching her place everything neatly on the shelves. No speeches. No complaints. No, "Look what I did for you." She didn't stay long. She said I needed sleep, gave me a hug, and left. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Not overwhelmed with emotion, just filled with a quiet certainty. I understood then that love isn't about grand gestures. It's about showing up at the right time. Not being there when it's fun, but being there when it's needed. I knew I would marry her one day. Not because she came over late at night, but because for her, it wasn't a sacrifice. It was simply natural. 30 years have passed. We wake up in the same house. I hug her every morning. She still takes care of me, quietly, without reminders. And every time I take food from home with me, I remember that late night and think. Sometimes an entire life is decided in a moment when someone simply chooses to show up so you won't go hungry. And she is still my love. It didn't happen on a date or during any special occasion. It happened at a party, or rather, at a very boring party. You know the type. Someone's birthday, a lot of familiar and half-familiar faces, loud music, conversations about nothing. People standing in circles, laughing a bit louder than something actually deserves. We came together. I knew right away it would drag on. She did too. But we both tried to be polite, smiling, keeping the conversation going, pretending we were fine. About 40 minutes in, I was listening to someone tell their third story about work when she leaned toward me and quietly asked, "Hey, are you bored too?" I didn't even have time to answer, because it was exactly the question I'd been wanting to ask myself. I told her I was. She looked around again, took in the scene one more time, and said, "Let's just leave. Not because anything's wrong, just because this isn't interesting." That caught me off guard. Not everyone dares to just get up and go. Most people stay. They tell themselves that this is how it's supposed to be. I asked if she had something in mind. She smiled and said we could stop by a store, buy some beer, and go to a sauna. No plan, no group, just us. We didn't make excuses. We said goodbye to the host, put on our jackets, and walked out. It was cool outside. We walked side by side, laughing for no particular reason, just because we'd done what we actually wanted. At the store, she took her time picking snacks, commented on everything, argued with herself about what to get, then said this was already way better than any party. The sauna was quiet. No one talking loudly. No one trying to impress anyone. We just sat there, had a beer, talked about everything and nothing at the same time. At one point, she said she loved spontaneous decisions like this, that she preferred things not because they're expected, but because they're real. I looked at her and suddenly realized something. I didn't need all that noise if I had someone beside me who could say, "Let's get out of here," and actually mean it. That's when I realized I loved her even more. Not for something grand or dramatic, but for choosing us over appearances, calm over crowds, and what felt right over what was expected. Sometimes love grows deeper, not in perfect settings, but in the moment you walk out of a place together where you don't belong, and realize you don't need anything else. My girlfriend seemed to have superpowers, and I'm not exaggerating. It didn't take long for me to realize that around her, you couldn't play roles. At all. Not even the small, harmless ones. She was like a walking lie detector, without wires or blinking lights. It started with little things. I'd say I was fine, and she'd look at me for a second and ask what was really wrong. I'd say I wasn't tired, and she'd quietly put the kettle on. I'd pretend I didn't care, and she'd suddenly change the topic. At first, it scared me. I caught myself being afraid to say things. Not because she was harsh or judgmental. She wasn't. It just felt like she could see a step ahead, sometimes even before I did. Sometimes it felt like she could read my mind. I'd barely form a thought, and she'd already react, not with words, but with actions. I could stay quiet all evening, and then she'd suddenly say, "You're not really here right now." And it was more accurate than any direct question. Once, I tried to lie, stupidly, over something small. I said I hadn't seen a message from a friend, even though I had. I just didn't want to deal with it. She didn't check my phone, didn't interrogate me. She just looked at me and said, "You don't look like that when you're telling the truth." That was it. I didn't even feel like arguing. I started noticing something strange. Around her, I slowly stopped lying at all. Not just to her, to myself. I stopped saying I liked things I didn't. Stopped pretending I was calm when I wasn't. Stopped brushing off emotions. Not because she demanded honesty, but because hiding felt pointless. The strongest moment happened one evening. We were sitting in her kitchen, drinking tea, barely talking. I was overwhelmed with work, decisions, thoughts I didn't want to share with anyone. I was about to say the usual, "I'm fine." She said something first. Quietly, "You don't have to be strong right now." And that broke me more than any confession could have. I didn't explain anything. Didn't justify myself. I just exhaled, and for the first time in a long while, allowed myself to be honest. Not loudly, not dramatically, just honest. That's when it hit me. I loved her more not because she could see through me, but because next to her, I didn't need armor. When no one is trying to catch you in words. When no one interrogates you. When someone simply feels you. Sometimes the strongest superpower is seeing someone exactly as they are and choosing not to turn away. I realized I loved her more in a situation where she didn't do anything right or impressive. She was just herself. We went to my parents' place, not for a visit, to help. Their old summer house needed fixing, cleaning, throwing things out. I knew it would be a hard day. Dirt, exhaustion, tension. Honestly, I wasn't sure whether to bring her. Not because of her, because it wasn't romantic. No comfort. Old house, cold water, dust, and my father constantly commenting on everything. But she said she'd come. At first, everything was okay. She was polite, helped out, listened. But as the day went on, the tension built up. My father started nitpicking. My mother fussed. I grew irritated. At some point, I snapped. Not at her, just in general. I answered my father sharply, slammed a door, and went outside. I stood there smoking, expecting that she'd come tell me I was wrong, that I should calm down. That's usually what happens. She came out about 10 minutes later. She didn't say anything, just handed me the gloves I'd left inside, and said my dad asked her to tell me he'd lost his temper. That was it. She didn't lecture me, didn't position herself between us, didn't try to fix everything. She simply didn't make it worse. Later that evening, driving home, I apologized. Said it had been a rough day and maybe I shouldn't have dragged her into it. She answered calmly. Said days like that happen. That families are complicated. And that it hadn't scared or bothered her to be there. That's when I realized something important. Before, I'd been afraid to show this part of my life. The messy one. The imperfect one. The side where I'm not always right. With her, it was okay. I loved her more not because she handled everything perfectly, but because she didn't turn away when she saw reality. Not the edited version of me. I realized I loved her more on a day when it came down to money. Not pretty. Not romantic. Very specific. We were already living together. Not long enough for everything to be perfect, but long enough for real-life stuff to surface. Rent, bills, groceries, suddenly everything was shared. That month, something went wrong at my job. My salary was delayed. Not for a day or two, indefinitely. I knew it happens, but it still felt like a personal failure. I'm used to relying on myself. I didn't tell her for a few days. Not because I was hiding it, because I didn't want to look weak. Then a bank notification popped up. Utilities. Deadline approaching. I sat in the kitchen staring at my phone, knowing I couldn't avoid the conversation anymore. I told her everything honestly. No drama. I didn't have the money yet. Didn't know when it would come. I'd figure it out. But this was the situation. I expected tension. Questions. Maybe frustration. She listened calmly. Asked how much we needed to cover this month. I told her the amount. She opened her banking app, sent the money, and said we'd sort it out later. Not you owe me. Not how did this happen. Not, I warned you. Just, later. And the most important part, nothing changed afterward. She didn't start counting every purchase. Didn't remind me. Didn't bring it up every evening. A couple of weeks later, my salary came through. I transferred everything back and started apologizing. She was surprised. Said there was nothing to apologize for. That it wasn't help. Just what happens when people are together. That's when it hit me. I loved her more not because she covered the bill, but because she didn't use it against me. She didn't turn it into leverage. Didn't keep score. Didn't remind me who was in the stronger position. She simply stayed, without calculations. And that's when I realized this was someone I wouldn't be afraid to face real difficulties with. Not symbolic ones, but the kind people usually keep quiet about.